It's a great pleasure to meet you in this beautiful castle. As I was saying when I just arrived, it's probably one of the very first time that I have to speak in a castle, but I think this is Slovenia. With more than 1,000 of these kind of beautiful places around it, it's only fitting that we have this important discussion here. I want to start by thanking you for organizing this incredibly important discussion at this very important time for not just the Western Balkans, but the entire European continent. So obviously I want to thank the Center for European Perspective as well as the Bled Strategic Forum for putting this together during my visit. I'm going to make some brief remarks before joining the State Secretary for what I hope to be an engaging discussion with all of you here today. But perhaps to start by saying that Europe, as we know it, is not the same place as it was 6 months ago, let alone 6 years ago. In turn, the European Union, as we know it, has also been affected and will have to adapt to the new situation. And I believe the last Western Balkans European Union summit, as well as its general response and unity with Ukraine, has shown that at least to some extent, the European Union has started to understand that. I keep receiving the question, wherever I go, in Brussels, in the region, yesterday in Slovenia as well, whether we are disappointed that Ukraine, as well as Moldova, received the candidate status. My answer always is, how can we not be supportive of Ukraine? The people of Ukraine, just like the people of Kosovo more than 2 decades ago, are putting their life on the line to be able to defend the values that we all share as democratic nations, and to be able to defend the very foundations on which the European Union was created and lies on, even today. For that reason, I think that despite the big disappointment within the Western Balkans, that the enlargement is dragging and dragging for many years, for some more, for some a little less, we should always, including right now, take a look at the positives. And I think the main positive message out of the summit is that the European Union finally, after decades, is looking at enlargement as a geostrategic concept, rather some bureaucratic process. It is geostrategic precisely because of the answer that it gave to Ukraine and Moldova. Having been through much of the same just 2 decades ago of what Ukraine is going through right now, I'm sure we cannot feel any other way than just happy and extremely fulfilled with the answer that the European Union gave on Ukraine. Equally so, I believe that we cannot have 2 different answers or try to divide Europe into 2 different Europes. One that will be within the European Union and one that will be looked as second-hand citizens, second-hand countries that should wait for decades and decades. Whereas I believe the Western Balkans has shown, at least the majority of the countries in the Western Balkans have shown, that we belong alongside our European Union partners. The Euro-Atlantic institutions are not simply our destiny and our vision. They are the overwhelming desire of the people of the Republic of Kosovo, which has shown in poll after poll to be the most pro-NATO as well as the pro-European nation in the region, in the continent, and beyond. Around 90% of our people continue to support our Euro-Atlantic vision and Euro-Atlantic path, no matter the difficulties, no matter the hurdles on the way. Naturally, the last Council meeting was a big disappointment for the Western Balkans in a number of ways. But as I said, also I believe a significant breaking point, because it did show that it is of a geostrategic importance, it's of a strategic importance to the EU itself to include other countries in Europe within the European Union, obviously in a merit-based process. So the disappointment is obviously there, but there was also a moment of redefinition of how enlargement is seen which we believe is an important momentum to continue now during the Czech presidency. And let me reassure you that no matter the obstacles, we will not be deterred from the Euro-Atlantic future. I believe it is our responsibility to continue to work closely with our European Union partners and to convince them why the EU, even the EU itself, is better off with the Western Balkans within it. We continue to repeat that a Europe whole, free, and at peace will only be a Europe whole, free, and at peace once our countries from our region will be able to join. I think we also need to take into account the fact that if the EU doesn't want to integrate the Western Balkans, if the EU rejects enlargement for the Western Balkans, there will be others who will want to integrate the Western Balkans. Whenever the EU leaves a vacuum, it has always been used by other malign actors, primarily Russia, and to some extent also China. But while the people of Kosovo have always and will continue to resist this malign influence, we clearly see that in some countries of our region, these actors are trying to destabilize because they don't want Europe to succeed. They don't want the EU to succeed as a values-based system. And obviously, they don't want NATO to succeed as a values-based system. Therefore, it is extremely important to note that while the people and the institutions of the Republic of Kosovo fully support a merit-based process, because we don't see the EU as a cash machine where we simply take some funds and in return we work with Moscow, but we see the EU as a values-based system fundamentally based on the values of rule of law, human rights, and democracy. That is why there was an overwhelming support back last year by the people of Kosovo for the new institutions that, of course, were running on a political platform that is based precisely on these values, rule of law, democracy, and human rights. The Republic of Kosovo is implementing enormous reforms at a record pace that have taken up Kosovo on a 17-place higher index when it comes to transparency as well as fighting crime and corruption. Our country is outperforming and is miles ahead of other countries in the region when it comes to many areas, from democracy and human rights also to economic development. But we're not implementing these reforms just because the EU is asking us to do so, but primarily because the end beneficiaries are the citizens of Kosovo, because it is in their interest, it's in the interest of our country to make sure that we carry out these reforms in order to bring lasting peace, prosperity, and stability. Just over 2 decades ago, Kosovo was a war-torn society. Now it has transformed into a thriving democracy and economy with a lot of potential. But we do understand that democracy is never a finite project. It's never a finished project. We aim for more, we strive for more, and we work for more on a daily basis, always understanding that no matter the hurdles and the difficulties, there is absolutely nothing that they can take us away from our Euro-Atlantic path. No matter how difficult it is, no matter the fatigue, we will continue working on it. Our patience is not going to go grim. We will work with each and every member state to make sure that the European dream of the people of Kosovo becomes true. Because just 2 decades ago, they were at the same position that the people of Ukraine are now. For that reason, I think that no matter how hard it seems right now, as president of Kosovo, I don't allow for any place for pessimism. And I continue to be perhaps one of the very few positive voices in these disappointing meetings, because I think that there might be some, even within the European Union, who would be happy if we give up and say, we're too disappointed, so how about instead of trying to carry out reforms, instead of trying to move on and convince everyone that we deserve to be at that table, we should just sit with one another, create waiting rooms, so that the European Union can move on by itself and we create our own Europe. But I don't think that's the right solution. The solution of two Europes has never been, historically has never been, the right solution. The solution of a Europe whole, united, free, and at peace is what we should all strive for. So we look up to Slovenia, obviously, as a great example from our region. We learn from Slovenia, from its experience, but at the same time, we count on the political support of Slovenia, one of the countries that knows our region so well, to make sure that we give a strong message to the European Union that if anyone ever thought that Europe will be a united and a peaceful project without the Western Balkans, they're absolutely mistaken. So probably I should stop at this to leave some space for discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President, for these words. Well, let me be a little bit pessimistic so that we can have an interesting debate on our hands. Vojko, you are in the office of the Prime Minister of Slovenia now. You have been at the European Council. There is a sense of disappointment. There is a sense of disappointment in the region that the European Council didn't back the words with deeds. What we just heard the President saying, it's all nice and true, but these words we are repeating inside of the European Union for a long, long time, especially when it comes to enlargement, especially when it comes to geostrategic importance of the Western Balkans, and yet not a lot is happening. I mean, there is always a new methodology in place, there is always a new instrument which we are introducing, but real steps of political cooperation and enlargement process as such has not yet taken place, or at least it's not taken place in a way that would really tie this region to European Union. We were talking, and the President mentioned different actors who are quite embedded, to say so, in the region, who are getting around. Is European Union, looking at from your experience, ready to actually do this geostrategic move and move more forcefully towards the region? We had some ideas. We heard some ideas from President Macron, from President of European Council Michel, about forming political community. But isn't this a two Europe basically concept? What do you think? Where are we going from this European Council? Is the enlargement policy still alive?
I will try to disappoint you, I mean, you as a pessimist, because at the last council, there were some big moves ahead. For the simple fact that the Russian aggression to Ukraine, or invasion, whatever you want, is such a big game changer in the world that who does not realize that must really be blind. So, not to speak too long about that, but our attempt to bring ahead this sleeping beauty, I say, about Bosnia, I mean, and to try to grant the status of the candidate also to Bosnia after we have confirmed Ukraine. So, because if you ask yourself why was we a little bit late on Bosnia, well, then it's obvious. There was not much time because we were pushing for Ukraine, and after Ukraine was safe, even after some countries finally said yes to Ukraine, then we had time to also refer to Bosnia, and we have, and the Council was speaking about Bosnia after many, many years of not even mentioning Bosnia as a member, as a candidate, as a possible candidate. So this is first step ahead. Second is that many countries were in our favor. Poland, Czech Republic, Austria was completely with Slovenia, and some other countries that were there at the meeting, which you know it is discreet, and they meet just between them, the head of states or prime ministers. But even more important is that no country was against. Not even Netherlands. Nobody was against visa liberalization for Kosovo. So I believe this is due to Russian aggression to Ukraine. And as Italians like to say, there is always some luck in every tragedy. If this is not luck, at least is a move ahead. So in these days, we are drafting the report on the last council, where we are bringing Bosnia even further ahead. We will try to clean the sheet of conditions that are prepared for Bosnia and to have some 2 or 3 very clear conditions about the rule of law, of course, in Bosnia. And we will give a chance to Bosnia to maybe have candidate status in December, after we make our decision in October. And if Bosnia delivers before the December, that could be it. But it will depend on them. The other reason is that I'm more positive than you, is that European Union and even NATO can show that we are integrating, while Russia is invading and annexating. I mean, this is so obvious and so clear, and such a contrapunct of the modern life, that if this is not clear then to somebody, then it should really ask himself, what is his ideology not to understand what is going on in this world, because international order almost completely collapsed. And if I finish this first intervention with saying how we were working in Kosovo from 2006 to 2008, I say today that I'm deeply convinced that the independence of Kosovo in 2008 was not only the right decision, but was the only possible decision, because there was no other way to finish all those discussions. We have tried, I don't know how many attempts in United Nations by Ischinger, by Ahtisaari. We had everything, everybody on board except one country, Russia. Even China said, okay, we can have this so-called, multilateral independence, or internationally agreed independence. Russia's always said no. After 5 or even 7 attempts in United Nations, we got tired. Kosovo declared independence unilaterally, because it is always unilaterally at the end of the day. It can't be other. And 2 years after that, International Court in Hague decided, by the question from Serbia, whether this independence was legal or not, and the court decided that Kosovo independence was not against the international law. So I believe that the cost-benefit, geostrategic, as man President said, geostrategic cost-benefit for European Union to enlarge on the Western Balkans is so clear now. The difference is so and so. Before it was maybe so-so, but now, if we don't enlarge, if we are not credible in the Western Balkans, somebody else will be. Not integrating, but possibly annexating.
Yeah, thank you, Vojko. But this is exactly what I was saying. We are looking for some kind of credibility of the process. I mean, right now, even if you look at Kosovo and its road towards European Union, as you said, Madam President, there was a lot of, there still is a lot of obstacles. I mean, you are waiting for this visa liberalization as a holy grail. It's like something as North Macedonia is waiting for the start of negotiations. It's a long time coming. You did a lot of technical assessments. You did all the benchmarks, and yet the political decision about these things didn't happen yet, because as I understand, there are some movements, and maybe you can shed a little bit of light how this process is going to continue in the future. But maybe just let's stop a little bit with what Vojko was saying regarding the influence of other actors, especially Russia, in the region. Now, the Russian aggression on Ukraine changed a lot of things. It changed the European Union, it's going to change Europe, but it also changed a little bit the relations inside of the region, inside of the Western Balkans. Can you say or elaborate a little bit more about how this aggression changed the relations between different countries in the region? Because also, as our Prime Minister stated a couple of days ago, there are different voices in the region regarding on how to approach the whole Russian aggression.
I think we don't really need to reinvent the wheel on many things or try to make new analysis, because in the Western Balkans, as in many other places around the world, but especially in the Western Balkans, we need to look at a bit of a history. And history shows that whenever the Transatlantic Alliance did not have enough attention to the Western Balkans, there were always other actors, primarily Russia, that were using that vacuum, as I said. And that is particularly true now after the aggression in Ukraine, because there is an interest of Russia to expand the conflict so that it can divert the attention of the West in a couple of places and not have all of the attention on Ukraine only. And secondly, they're looking for more fertile ground to exert their influence, and they have always found some fertile ground in the Western Balkans through Serbia. Unfortunately, instead of turning more to the European Union, throughout these years, Serbia has turned more to Moscow. It has obviously tried to sit in two chairs at once. It has tried to walk on two paths at once, and obviously that is impossible, especially if these two paths are so far away from one another. But while the European Union had a clear picture for years that Serbia is being used as a proxy state, as a satellite state of Putin, unfortunately, our impression is that instead of using clear language and clear action towards Serbia, it has used an active appeasement policy towards Serbia. The appeasement policy doesn't work with autocrats, as we have seen historically again. It only strengthens them. It emboldens them. It encourages them to be more autocratic, to be more hegemonic. In the case of Russia, to be more imperialistic. So the more you trust them that they will be nicer, the more you appease them, the more they will be encouraged to destabilize and to attack the very values-based system that we believe in and our democratic way of life. So with the European Union appeasing Vučić, I think what they are getting, and what we are all getting, in fact, because Serbia is a neighbor in our region, is a more pro-Putin Serbia. And if you have seen probably the latest polls in Serbia, around 30% of the people now believe in the European perspective. And the number of people who trust Putin is growing and growing by the day. It's not going down. So I think it's about time that Europe, and particularly the European Union, undertakes clear action towards Serbia on three main fronts. First, politically, to give them a clear signal that if they will continue to serve Putin in its interest, the European Union should suspend its accession talks with Serbia. The second response should be economic. Serbia should stop getting EU money if they don't believe and act on EU values. And the third response should be in the defense security area, which means, and primarily NATO, I would say here, needs to strengthen its role in the Western Balkans, generally speaking, as it is in Eastern Europe right now, but to make sure that there is a stronger role of NATO, both in terms of its presence, as well as in terms of enlargement. Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina must join NATO sooner rather than later, because the sooner we join NATO, the lesser the possibilities for Russia to destabilize a non-NATO territory in the Western Balkans, because they will obviously opt for non-NATO territory at a time when NATO is telling them you cannot touch any NATO territory. So obviously they will aim for countries that are not members of NATO. So the attempts to exert influence and to increase influence from Russia will always be there. From China economically, obviously, will always be there. What we need is, one, a clear rejection of this influence from the countries of the Western Balkans, and in Kosovo you will always find that, but at the same time, a clear message from the European Union and NATO that they will not allow that. So I think the action plan should be very simple here. if you want to fight Russian influence, you also need to fight their proxies in the Western Balkans and beyond. You must fight their proxies. You must fight their satellites and not allow for them to increase the economic influence, military influence, as well as political influence in our region, which is part of Europe, because the more destabilized the Western Balkans is, the more destabilized the entire European continent will be. On visa liberalization, or perhaps just a word on how this has changed how regional cooperation works. Look, out of the 6 Western Balkans, 5 have had a very clear response on the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We have immediately adopted sanctions. 1 has not. I think the picture is very clear. While all of us try in one way or another to work on regional cooperation, because that is important, what we need to make clear is that these kind of regional initiatives should never be used to drag and to delay the European perspective. And sometimes they are used precisely for that. We in Kosovo believe in the Berlin process because we believe that it was designed precisely to accelerate our European integration process rather than delay it. And we will continue to engage on that. On visa liberalization, I think this is one of those processes where we obviously expect the EU to deliver, because it's been more than 4 years that we have fulfilled all of the criteria. It has been confirmed and reconfirmed many times by the European Commission, by the European Parliament, that these criteria have been fulfilled. Now there are some lone voices in the European Union who say that let's take the process back to 0 and reevaluate it. Obviously, that is absolutely unacceptable, and we will not become an actor in such a process. So we will never be convinced to go back to 0 and kind of reevaluate each and every criteria. Just imagine, compared to the other countries in the region who had to fulfill around 40-something criteria, we had to fulfill 94. And we have fulfilled all of them more than 4 years ago. So what we need right now is simply for the Council to say yes. And I agree with Vojko. In the latest Council meeting, it was the very first time in the history, long history of this issue of visa liberalization, that there was absolutely no country against. No country was against visa liberalization. And practically almost everyone, I would say, was in favor of immediately moving on with procedures, which is why I think for the very first time in 4 years, we are allowing ourselves to be a little optimistic that it might be done during the Czech presidency. 2 reasons for that. One, as Vojko mentioned, because of the war in Ukraine and the new way of how member states are viewing enlargement, although visa liberalization has nothing to do with enlargement, let's be clear on that, but it has to do with, simply treating us as Europeans. But secondly, it has to do with the reforms being undertaken in Kosovo and the credibility that the new institutions of Kosovo are showing towards all European partners. Practically every country participating in the Council has congratulated Kosovo for the outstanding reforms, especially in the area of rule of law, that we are undertaking in this past year. And I think this has made them feel more comfortable with visa liberalization and with also other processes, because we are planning to apply for a candidate status this year during the Czech presidency. Someone earlier said, poor Czechs, they will have a lot of work to do. But I would say lucky Czechs, that they will have to do with a country that is a shining example of democracy, human rights, rule of law, and economic development, and trust in the institutions for the work that we are doing. So while we are really carrying out and delivering, we should also obviously expect, as you said, from the European Union to do its part and to deliver.
Thank you very much, Ms. President. Vojko, you're a diplomat, but you're also a scholar of the region. You have been involved with all the things that are happening in the region for the last 30 years, if not even more. Why it's so hard in the region to leave the history behind? You know, because as Ms. President was saying, it's clear that the relations and the distrust among neighbors is still present. There is still a lot of hate, I would say hate, nationalistic rhetoric. There is still a lot of things which are preventing the region from moving forward. We have two major, now three, with North Macedonia and Bulgaria, where we are hoping that things are going to move forward. But we have two major security and political issues in the region which are not moving anywhere right now. One is the functionality of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The other one is the dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo. How do we move from the status quo, which we have right now, to the status or to the environment of trust where the real negotiations and the real compromise solutions can be found? Just take the microphone, Vojko, because we are also live streaming.
In two ways. First, it came to my mind that Ivo Andrić, who lived in Sarajevo and was a Nobel Prize winner author, at certain point left Sarajevo because he couldn't stand anymore to live there, because it was difficult to make any appeasement between different religions, nations, and so on for him. And he said when he left that, let me translate this right, the layers of hatred are so deep in Bosnia that one day it will just explode. Well, we had that explosion already. So now you are asking me what can be done. And I remember a discussion, bilateral meeting with President of Montenegro, Milo Đukanović, just in the Madrid meeting now when we had. He said that he is not disappointed at all with the last European Council. And he said he is quite satisfied. He understands why politicians from Bosnia and even Vučić from Serbia were not very satisfied. This is what he said, because they don't realize that you also have to deliver. Not only European Union, you have to deliver. And then Milo Đukanović said, look at us. We were the most pro-Russian nation in the whole world for 300 years. Anybody who knows a little bit of history of Montenegro knows that. They have established diplomatic relations with Russia, with the Russian Empire, almost 300 years ago. And until recently, until, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 years ago, the pro-Russian sentiment in Montenegro was atomic. Then they started to change their public opinion systematically, politically. They were talking to youth, to young people, saying that European Union is much more attractive than the remains of Soviet Empire. That in European Union we are tackling the issues of climate changes, democracy, human rights, while in Russia, in Moscow, they are tackling how to get more territories, although it's the biggest country in the world. But the most important was, Milo Đukanović said that finally they have succeeded. And in 2006, I believe, or 2007, there was this independence of Montenegro based on referendum. And that was the crucial event in Montenegro. I was there as an outside advisor in Montenegro, and I must tell you, it wasn't easy to get that majority, but they got it. And today, after 2 years of government, previous government that wasn't really pro-European, they are again back on track. So his advice, what he was trying to tell was that in Serbia, they are not doing enough to change their public opinion, to speak to their youngsters, because they have to speak to young generation. Why? Because they are not fleeing to Moscow. Everybody is fleeing from Serbia to the west. Everybody. So far, they have lost between 350 and 400,000 young people, educated people who left Serbia for West.
But it's not just Serbia, it's also other countries.
Not just from Serbia, this number. Then followed by Croatia, which is not. As you know, Croatia in 91, they had 4.7 million of population. Now they are less than 4 million, which is a tragedy for Croatia. Serbia lost 1 million almost. So if you consider what was possible to do in Montenegro after 300 years being the most pro-Russian country, it must not be impossible for others to do the same. But you must strive, you must put something into it. The same is in Bosnia. If they understand that the rule of law is something that you can deliver to establish, constitutional court, the high court, and so whatever they need to bring, then one day they will be able also to cooperate between different nations and religions on that basis, on the rule of law basis, and not on the tribal or nationalistic basis which they are trying to do now. So steps in Bosnia is more complicated, but we need those steps to introduce the rule of law, and this is what we are trying to do, together with Austria especially and other countries that are joining us now in support of Bosnia. But in Serbia, it's just this. They will have to decide whether are they with Moscow or they are with European Union. One day they will have to answer to this question, because you cannot just put it aside. After Finland and Sweden decided to leave neutrality, Sweden, after 200 years, can you imagine? 200 years of the Swedish neutrality, and they opted like nothing to enter NATO. Finland, after, 80 years of independence. Switzerland, the most iconic neutral nation, decided to introduce sanctions against Russia, which they didn't do not even during the Second World War against Hitler. Well, this is a big game changer, and one day they will have to realize it also in Belgrade. The sooner, the better.
Big game changer. What is a big game changer in the dialogue? How do we move the dialogue forward? Because, as I was saying, these two questions from the past, which are not resolved, are also have a malign effect on the regional cooperation. And I've been following Western Balkans a little bit lesser than Vojko, but still for the last 20 years. And for the last 10 years, we are talking about two things, and I know them by heart. It's mutual recognition of diplomas, mutual recognition of professional qualifications. And of course, these are technical things who can actually move the region forward. Regional cooperation can be more sustainable, more effective, and we can't do it because, you have political problems which are preventing that. Can you imagine regional cooperation without these political problems? So this is why I'm asking, is now a chance, because of these geostrategic changes happening in Europe, to also work more effectively on the dialogue to actually come to some kind of compromise, some kind of solution, which would then move things forward. President.
The game changer would be Serbia understanding that the Republic of Kosovo is forever. There's no way back. Our independence is irreversible. We're not going anywhere. We're there to stay forever as a sovereign republic. That is the game changer. So simply for Serbia accepting reality, a reality that is not going to change. In fact, the only change that can happen is Kosovo to move forward, to strengthen its international standing, but absolutely not backwards. The more Serbia is encouraged to believe that what you call a compromise can be a compromise on Kosovo's statehood or territorial integrity or its internal functionality or its constitutional order, the less possibility for the final agreement to be achieved. Because there can be no final agreement which leaves mutual recognition aside. There can be no final agreement, a bilateral agreement, because here we're talking about the status of our bilateral relations with Serbia. We're not talking about Kosovo. We're talking about two countries and their bilateral relations. That's what the dialogue is about. It's not about Kosovo or its statehood or its territory, and it will never be that way. I think the acceptance of reality is the game changer.
And
The second thing, I think the big mistake here is to say all countries hate each other. All people hate each other. You all have your own share on what happened in the Western Balkans. I'm sorry, but I can't accept the notion of moral equivalency between the aggressor and the victim, because that is history revisionism. I did not go and kick someone else out of their home. I was home when I was kicked out of my home. And so were all the people of Kosovo. I did not go and attack someone in their country. I was in my own home. We were attacked. We were the victims of a genocidal regime, not the other way around. So this notion of, treating everyone as if, it's just a bunch of people killing each other is history revisionism. This notion as if you all just hate each other is history revisionism. Dealing with the past is the solution of not, being kept hostage of the past. Serbia has not dealt with the past. It's not an issue of hate. It's an issue of truth when I say that Serbia even today sleeps in mass graves, because it's the truth. It's not me hating the Serbs. It's me telling the truth. Almost 2,000 people from Kosovo are still in massive graves in Serbia, many of them little children, infants. I'm telling the truth. This is not about hate. It's about asking to deal with the past. A country that has waged wars, a country that even today is playing by Putin's playbook, a country that even today wants to destabilize Bosnia, Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Montenegro, at least these three countries. So let me ask a question here. Have you ever heard a country in the region saying that they are afraid that they would be attacked by Kosovo? Have you ever heard a country in the region saying that they are afraid that they would be attacked by Montenegro, or by Croatia, Slovenia, or that they would be attacked by Albania, or that they would be attacked by North Macedonia? How many countries have you heard in our region saying that they are concerned that they might be attacked by Serbia? Almost everyone. Almost everyone in our region expresses concerns about the destabilizing intentions of Serbia, obviously always aided and abetted by Russia. So I don't think we can just put everyone in the same sack. My country, no matter the political differences among the political elites, has shown since 1999 onwards, but especially since 2008 onwards, to always contribute to peace and stability in the region. Every single proposal that even now we are putting on the table in the dialogue with Serbia contributes to peace and stability in the region. So how would one explain the fact that we're proposing a peace agreement with Serbia? We're the ones, the victims of the aggression, the victims of genocide, are proposing a peace agreement with Serbia, and they're rejecting. How would you explain the fact that we are proposing an agreement on non-aggression with Serbia, and even now, after the Russian aggression against Ukraine, they don't accept to sign that they would not use aggression against their neighbors? So I think the situation is clear here. You have 5 countries who are pro-Western, pro-European, pro-NATO, who constantly contribute to peace and stability in the region, and you have another one who uses Russian MiG-29s to destabilize its neighbors. This is the clear situation. It's not just a bunch of countries fighting one another. And I think we have to be clear on that. If we want long-standing peace and stability, we need to tell the truth. And we need to call things by their name.
Okay, maybe just a question, a sub-question to what you both have been saying. On the other hand, Serbia has proposed a lot of regional initiatives. And I'm talking here regarding the open Balkans. It has invited also Kosovo to join. There are 3 countries now in the open Balkans. Serbia, North Macedonia, and Albania. How do you view this kind of initiatives? Because, looking from the European Union, it's hard to disagree that this is a homegrown regional initiative which is aimed at facilitating quicker transit of goods, of people, of what the region as a regional cooperation should be doing. Why is Kosovo against? Why Kosovo doesn't see a merit in this kind of initiative?
Perhaps just a little correction at the beginning. Serbia has not invited Kosovo. They say that they are inviting Kosovo and Metohija. So I guess that's my answer. Why? Kosovo believes in regional cooperation, in sincere and honest cooperation that is based on a merit-based process. So if Serbia says, we are inviting a province there called Kosovo and Metohija, according to them, obviously a logic of the past. These are absolutely unacceptable for Kosovo because these kind of intentions, they violate the two main basic principles that regional initiatives need to lie on. First, it's all-inclusiveness in the outset, at the very beginning, from the very birth of the initiative. So all six must participate in creating the initiative. And secondly, it's the principle of equal footing. So equality was not, and still is not respected because Kosovo is not invited as an equal, sovereign, independent country, but is invited by Serbia as a province, which we're not. So because we are sovereign and independent, we do not accept regional initiatives that do not treat us as such. The second reason is, looking from the eyes of the EU, I think I would be very careful and very vigilant on what Russia supports so overwhelmingly. So if Lavrov is so overwhelmingly supporting the Open Balkan Initiative, I would put quite a big question mark on whether I would support something that Russia so vehemently supports. If I was European Union, which I'm not, if I was another democratic country in the European Union or in NATO, I would definitely, as Edward Joseph said, give the kiss of death to such an initiative once Lavrov so strongly supports and pushes for something like that. Thirdly, I believe, as I said earlier, that as opposed to the Berlin process, which is a clear roadmap towards bringing us closer to the European Union, the Open Balkan Initiative has failed to explain how it can bring us closer. In fact, it has explained a lot how it would create a waiting room rather than bring us closer to the European Union. And finally, my concerns are very much related to security. The initiative has failed to explain how it would stop more Russian influence. You probably all know, but perhaps I should mention, after the Russian aggression against Ukraine and sanctions against Russian businesses, around 200 Russian businesses have found safe haven in Serbia. More and more Russian spies and agents continue to find safe haven in Serbia. So once they have an open door in Serbia, that means that without any control, as advertised in the Serbian-initiated Open Balkan Initiative, they would have an open door to all of the Western Balkans through this initiative. So we have never received any answer whatsoever. How is this Russian influence going to be blocked if there would be such an open door to all of them through how, for the moment, it is planned? So we have a lot of questions. We have a lot of concerns when it comes to the initiative. These concerns have never been answered, to be very frank, because we as a country are not per se against regional cooperation. But obviously, before joining every single initiative, there are questions and concerns that we want answered, and they have never been answered. We respect the decision of these three countries to join their forces in what they call the Open Balkans, but I think they should also respect our decision to continue with what we believe to be the only way forward, and that is the Berlin process, which is now revived with the initiative of Chancellor Scholz, and all of what you mentioned, transit of goods, transit of people, free movement, the four freedoms, everything is already in the Berlin process. Everything is already there. So I don't think we should reject this strongly supported initiative, strongly supported by countries like Germany, France, and other members of the European Union, and try to replicate something where the main role is played by the guy who continues to destabilize our region.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. President. Now it's time for questions and hopefully answers. So who is going to be the first to ask a question? Please, Katya.
Foreign perpetrated disinformation in Western Balkans. Sadly, I have to note that the Serbian government is not participating, although they were invited, but for obvious reasons. How do you see we're very much engaging with Kosovo as well, are hoping for greater cooperation on that level. Would welcome your thoughts on that and your support as well. And how do you see the issue in the region of disinformation? Potential regional cooperation.
Okay, maybe Vojko first, and then Mr. President. The role of China, Vojko, and how do you see it moving forward?
Well, it's difficult to speak for China in this moment because we believe that in China there is something going on right now, and that going on means that they cannot be happy with the consequences of the Russian aggression to Ukraine. After 4 months of war, China is still not getting the GDP growth as they were expecting. And that is not easy for nobody in China, since Chinese Communist Party decides 5 years plan, and then you have to fulfill it. And if you are 50% below what you have promised to gain, as of now, that is a problem, even for the leader of Communist Party. So we hope that we can believe that China is not happy what is going on now in the world, and they will have to change something in autumn. Let me say that at the same time, we are expecting in autumn that we know what happens in October, November, or October already. In parts where the war is going on, the winter comes. And then you have to stop in one way or another. You have to dig in the ground, and then during the war, there will be no such conflicts as they are going on now. And the world maybe, and Russians, and China, and the Western side will have time to think what to do and what is going on and what is possible to arrange or to achieve ceasefire and then some negotiations. Well, in that terms, I believe that the only one who is really now threatening the situation in Balkans, especially after we have decided to grant the status candidate to Moldova and Ukraine, Bosnia is becoming soft belly. of the Europe, for the Russian interests, for the Russian propaganda. At the same time, I believe that the last decisions and further decisions in October in European Union will address the issue, again, the issue of so-called wider Europe, that is the idea of President Macron, where we will put inside together all these ideas, how to bring those countries that are aspiring to European Union membership in a more active manner. The idea of my Prime Minister, Mr. Robert Golob, is not just to have this process that will be parallel. I said, oh, thank God, it must not be parallel, because, you know, from the geometry, if you have two lines that are parallel, they never meet. I mean, they travel in eternity. So it must be convergent. Convergency in this process with awards. This is the idea of my Prime Minister, that if we have this cooperation with all those countries, then at certain point, if they are successful, like Kosovo is successful. I mean, I forgot to say before that Kosovo is a stable country that is stabilizing also their neighborhood, and they're doing very well. I mean, I've been to Pristina 2 years ago, and it's a different place than it was 10 years before. So congratulations. So I believe that these awards on this road, so if you achieve this, you upgrade your status and so on, is the solution, and the final award is the membership, nothing else but membership, because there is no reason to have no membership, because we are including even Georgia in this process, which is only normal. So if you ask me about this, the final answer is always the same. This region is our courtyard, and it should become all European Union. The sooner the better.
Thank you, Vojko. Maybe before I give the floor to Ms. President, because this is going to be her last answer, because we have to finish, maybe just a sub-question. Vojko said the winter is coming, and the winter is coming for everybody. The Russian aggression on Ukraine, of course, also changed a lot of things in terms of energy security, in terms of economic stability, and so on and so on. You know, I don't know if you remember, you probably don't. We have been together at one Aspen Institute conference, I think it was like 10 years ago, something like that. And you were a young parliamentarian, and I was an insignificant diplomat. I'm still an insignificant diplomat, you are a president, so this changed, you know, but you were even then, you know, quite vocal on how you have to do politics differently, how you have to introduce into politics gender equality, how you have to introduce into politics social justice, rule of law, and all these things. How is Kosovo prepared for the winter, especially in terms of economy? Inflation is growing, as it is in Slovenia and Europe, it's also in Kosovo. And also in terms of how are you satisfied with the change of politics? Is the things that you believe in, gender equality, social justice, is this being introduced into Kosovo politics? Are you gaining ground? I know you talked 1 year ago with Ischinger regarding how many women are unemployed. Is this getting better? Are the young people having perspective more as they had before? Thank you, President.
Thank you. On China, I think if I was asked to speak before the 24th of February, I would have mentioned China more than once. But after the 24th of February, what is clear to all of us is that what Russia wants in the Western Balkans is war. What China wants in the Western Balkans is economy. That is the difference, which is why I believe in the wake of the war in Ukraine, all of us are now more concerned about war, stopping destabilization and stopping warmongering from these Russian proxies. Secondly, Kosovo is the only country in the region that is not part of the Chinese Road and Belt initiative, and we've been extremely successful in stopping any kind of Chinese economic influence. And for that reason, the concern that you might find elsewhere when it comes to China is not as high in Kosovo, because we have been very successful in stopping any kind of influence. But when it comes to disinformation, what we hear lately is that Russia has tripled the amount of money that it spends on disinformation and propaganda. And obviously, a lot of that money is spent on the Western Balkans. We are struggling with that as well, but not to the extent that some other countries do, because we've been successful, I would say, not 100%, but to a quite large extent in fighting disinformation and propaganda. But it is an ongoing threat. It is an imminent threat, and it is a growing threat, which means that we are very much not just ready, but also interested to work with partners like you, partners around the world, to make sure that we are even more successful from now on in fighting this kind of propaganda and disinformation. I mean, as President Biden said in the Summit for Democracy, one of the biggest threats to democracies nowadays are not just tanks and Russian airplanes, but it's also the propaganda that it uses, and their interest in our region is as it has always been, to perhaps not go very traditional, but with a hybrid attacks and hybrid war. And in this sense, we need to be much more vigilant and invest a lot more in fighting this kind of disinformation and propaganda, which in a country like Kosovo is mostly trying to attack the legitimacy of the legitimate, democratically elected leadership, because they know that through this they can create political instability. And once there is political instability, they can, of course, attack security institutions and so on. So we are working inside the country, but also with partners, and would love to increase our partnership in order to be able to fight propagandas and disinformation as some of the biggest risks of democracy as we know it. When it comes to the winter, past winter was very difficult, especially when it comes to the energy crisis. As you know, Kosovo is highly dependent on coal. So what we're doing right now is investing quite aggressively in the positive aspect on renewables, especially wind and solar, to be able to at least tackle some of the energy deficiency, because the demand is growing, as you know, so that we can be much better off this coming winter. Secondly, when it comes to prices, the government is undertaking a number of economic initiatives and adopting a number of economic packages that can help families tackle the economic difficulties that we're facing right now. The inflation rate right now is the EU average, but for the people of Kosovo, that is felt in a more difficult way because the wages are lower. The quality of life is obviously lower compared to the EU average. And thirdly, we are, especially when it comes to social injustices and gender inequality, we have been working this past year on a number of projects, starting from supporting the private sector in projects that would enable more jobs for women, because the inactivity rate used to be very high. It's still high, but it is going down. It is going down with the level of unemployment, obviously. But we need to make sure that we continue to tackle, because it's been only 1 year, and obviously miracles can't happen in a year. You cannot tackle an inactivity rate of 81% among women in a year. But it's absolutely going down, and we will continue to work on this as one of the top priorities of the institutions, because women's economic empowerment is the right thing to do also for every country that wants to work on long-term economic development. If we don't use 50% of our workforce, of our labor force, which is women, that is stupid. It's not just wrong morally, but it's also wrong from an economic aspect, an economic point of view, because we will be leaving aside our own economic potential. So at the same time, there is support for the very first time in these decades. There is support for new moms, support for kids, so that we can at some extent have some social cohesion, because a lot of inequalities existed in our society for way too long. And last but not least, I want to mention rule of law, because it's the precondition of everything else that we're talking about. Once all our citizens feel equal before the law. That has a transformative effect on our economy. It has a transformative effect on social justice and so many other areas. So we are tackling these reforms in the area of rule of law because they are already showing their effect on everything else in all areas of life. For example, we've touched, which was unprecedented in our country, we had a double-digit economic growth in 2021, and this is immensely a result that we're yielding because of the rule of law reforms, because the citizens, the economies, businesses, also FDI, they trust the institutions in Kosovo, and that is extremely important to continue. It's been 1 year. It's been an extremely eventful year in terms of the reforms that are being undertaken at a record pace, but we should not be fulfilled and just sit back and say we are fine with what we have right now. Obviously, the economic difficulties because of the global crisis after the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis because of the many reasons, many of these don't depend on us, but that doesn't mean that we should just sit back and relax and say, oh, it's up to the big countries to decide on these. We have done a lot, but we have to do much more to make the lives of our citizens better and to ensure that they see their perspective and they see their future in Kosovo. And not outside of Kosovo. Obviously, a lot of migration happened in the past, but Kosovo right now is not even in the top 40 of countries when it comes to illegal migration. So no reason for any European member states to fear. So obviously the time is now, and we're 4 years too late for visa liberalization, just so that no one misunderstands this point. But are we happy with the change? I would say we're happy with the path that we have built and the pace that we're heading towards that path, but we're still not there yet where we want to see our country, but we have a few more years. Our citizens have given us a few more years as a chance to make sure that this change is one with which all of us will be happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. President. Let's hope that this new Olympic cycle of enlargement process is going to yield more results. I think the first indication is going to be what will happen during the Czech presidency. We are all hoping that, as Vojko mentioned at the beginning, we are going to see some improvement or some news regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina, that we are going to see some news regarding visa liberalization for Kosovo, that we are going to see hopefully a process starting regarding the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina, and hopefully that we are going to see also opening of negotiations for North Macedonia and Albania. If we achieve all this during the Czech presidency, I'm going to start to be optimistic again regarding the enlargement process. No, don't laugh. I mean, this is all possible, like it was possible in the former Olympic cycle. We just didn't get there. Thank you very much for coming. I have only 2 questions from the audience which were following us through live stream, and I can just answer them quickly. One was regarding the Western Balkans and the EU integration processes. Who is to blame? Are they equally to blame, EU and the Western Balkan countries? Do you agree? Yes, I agree. And Ivan Fuore, well, just to save us time. And Ivan Fuare, who was a special representative in Skopje of European Union, asked a question: what can be done to prevent the many bilateral disputes prevalent in the Western Balkans from contaminating the accession process? I think this is a question for another round table, since we still didn't actually found this magic stick on how not the bilateral questions actually having a malign effect on the enlargement process, as seen now with the North Macedonia and Bulgaria blockade. So thank you very much for coming. I hope it was interesting, and special thanks to Ms. President and also to Vojko for coming. Thank you very much.